What it do? Welcome into week 5 of the NFL season. It's fantasy spin time. You've been hitting the rankings, reading all the information, and we're going to hit on some of the big time stories heading into this week. It's the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show. Of course, just two dudes with you tonight. I'm JJ Buck along with Steven Masterson. And what a week it was, kicking off with the Falcons and Buccaneers Thursday Night Football in the ATL. And you're either feeling like a hero or a zero. And we got the hero and you got the zero. Because one of us had a Falcons wide receiver. The other was just staring, going, oh my gosh, how can Kirk Cousins be throwing for 509 yards and 4 tutties? But it's time for TNF Takes, the immediate reaction from Thursday Night Football and the fallout from it. What do we know about Kirk Cousins? Well, he's only rostered in 50% of Yahoo leagues. That number is going to skyrocket coming off that game where he scored over 31 points in 4-point passing touchdown leagues. He's got a favorable schedule coming up. Now, the question is, how much money are you going to burn on Kirk Cousins if it's FAB or waiver wire position? I think Kirk Cousins over the next month is a top 12 quarterback, is someone that you can trust in your lineup weekly because of the weapons. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, obviously trust him even a month into the season to throw the football that many times. His upcoming schedule is at Carolina, Seattle, at Tampa Bay, and the Dallas Cowboys. So this is a worthwhile investment, as we've discussed, if you're one of those players that's been streaming quarterbacks, because there hasn't been a lot of locks. The top 10 hasn't been easy. And we're going to discuss the quarterback position again this weekend because there's some guys inside the top 10 that don't feel like are top 10 quarterbacks. But Kirk Cousins has a proven track record, has an offensive coordinator that's already willing to let him go bonkers this early in the season. And I think he's worth waiver wire positioning if you need a quarterback and a decent FAB budget, because he's a guy you can pick up and play confidently the next 4 weeks of the fantasy football season. Steve, what was your reaction to seeing Kirk chains go off?
Well, I mean, from week 1 to now is crazy, right? Week 1, we sat on this podcast and said he doesn't look the same. But at this point, he's doing what he did last season, right before he got hurt. He looked amazing last season. He's doing it again. So, I mean, thought it was kind of, fitting that Matty Ice was in the building. They're retiring his number, and Kirk Cousins goes in and breaks his record for all-time passing yards in a game. So that was cool. Honestly, Kirk Cousins last night is not going to always have games where he throws for 400, 500 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. But it does make me feel a lot more confident in starting Darnell Mooney and Drake London. Really, the player that took the biggest hit from last night was Bijan. So that stinks, but I don't think that game plan's always going to be the case. I don't think they're always going to be behind and having to throw that much. But Kirk Cousins, 16 targets to Darnell Mooney, 13 to Drake London. It was great. His 3 targets, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and Kyle Pitts, were peppered with targets all night. So we always say there's 2. Last night was a rare exception where there was 3, but we saw the top 2. We know it's Darnell Mooney. We know it's Drake London. It's great. It's fantastic to watch. And I think Darnell Mooney is now a lock in your lineup.
Yeah, he's a weekly starter in especially 3 wide receiver leagues. I think you can start him confidently. When you look at what Mooney has done, after 9, 105, and 2 last night, that's already 3 games this season with 14 or more fantasy points before the 16 targets last night. He's already averaging 6 targets per game. So he's locked in as a weekly play. And you were on him. So if you listened to us last week, Darnell Mooney was your plant your flag last weekend. So you were letting people know, get this guy in your lineups. Now, he had 8 points last week, but he is as you said, a weekly player. And I think what I'm confident about moving forward, especially just over the next 4 weeks, if you're investing in Kirk Cousins, is I think we're going to see a solid floor. Now, early in the season, I do think it was a combination of Atlanta filling out what they wanted to do, Kirk Cousins in the passing game. You still heard Kirk Herbstreit last night talking about it on the Amazon broadcast. Times maybe he's still kind of not confident planting that foot and throwing. But if you're not confident, you can still wind up with 509 yards passing. And again, the upcoming schedule is the Panthers, Seahawks, Buccaneers again in Dallas. Like those are defenses you're not scared of. Those are games that he's going to get his points. So I think that's what I like about Cousins is he brings up that floor, which it's kind of been missing from the back half of QB really 6 through 12 right now, as we're getting so many spike games from guys, but we're kind of struggling to find those players. That's what Kirk could really bring to the table over the next month.
Well, Kirk Cousins at this point, I actually feel better than starting him over Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes has been a floor guy, but he hasn't ceilinged at all, right? He's 17 to 18 points. Kirk Cousins is probably going to get that worst case scenario, 16, 17 points, but we just saw his ceiling. So if I have that potential, and there's a lot of targets out there, that's a good offense, and it looked good last night. And they were taking some big shots and chances, and I loved it. I mean, they were running 25-yard comeback routes, which that's insane. Those are great routes, and it was opening up the middle of the field. So from a different perspective, it was a great game to watch. But I think Kirk Cousins should be a player on. If you have Patrick Mahomes, I would say to get him. But if you're streaming quarterbacks, he should be on your team.
And you mentioned a minute ago too, Bijan Robinson in this offense. He was drafted as one of the top 3 running backs. He hasn't been that guy this year. Look at PPR points per game so far: 16, 16, 13, 11, 10. The reality is, Bijan is a solid football player. He ain't that dude for fantasy just yet, but you're going to keep playing him because of the investment, and you just have to keep your fingers crossed for that spike week for Bijan Robinson in this offense. I do think that you can cool your jets on Tyler Algier. Like, I wouldn't keep chasing those games because we saw it last night. I think people saw the injury designation for Bijan Robinson, saw the snap count, the percentage that Tyler Algier was involved before that, probably played him, and then you got hurt. So Algier is one of those backs, we'll discuss it too coming up about you have to sit on them, but what do you do with these guys that are really pure handcuffs, and when do you try to get them into your lineups? And then Kyle Pitts. You're just chasing tight end. Like, there's not a lot of depth out there right now, and he bounced back 7 for 88 on 8 targets, and that's after a big old 0 points last week. And it's one of those players that you're just going to keep chasing those weeks. It was 11 points, 5 points, 7 points, 0. Goes off big last night, and that's just the life of Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, the problem I ran into, I had a few people reach out to me, and they said, do I start Kyle Pitts? And some of them, they picked up Dallas Goedert. And I was like, no, you have to start Goedert. And then you see Kyle Pitts go off for, 15.8 points. And you're like, hey, it's like Kyle Pitts is going to have those games, but he's also going to get you games where you're just not going to be happy. So
there's not a lot of floor plays at tight end right now.
Yeah. But if you have Dallas Goedert, or you picked up somebody like that off a waiver wire, I'd play that guy.
Well, you weren't. Yeah, they were on bye this week,
but yeah, it's just one of those things where you're going to struggle with that with Kyle Pitts.
And for Tampa Bay, we're seeing the running back rotation continue. Rachaad White, 10 carries, 72 yards, 3 catches for -6 yards. You had 2 bad. Well, I wouldn't say bad. That game, it was you win it. No, you win it. You win it. The Tampa Bay trying to get Atlanta to use their timeouts, and they get hit for the holding penalty, and then they missed the face mask on the tackle. They punt the football, but then the Gunners don't know where it is. It goes in the end zone. But the ending to that game was just teams not wanting to win it until the touchdown pass in overtime where the Falcons finally took it. But anyway, because you saw Bucky Irving fumble there. There was that interception after the fumble, even before that scenario that we just went to.
That was insane.
Yeah, so White and Irving are essentially guys that I think this is going to be a committee for a while. I know Bucky Irving looks faster. It's popped off in some of the metrics that, of course, the fantasy community is putting out there, but they're not playing White at this moment in time. So they're depth guys, RB2s potentially for you, but you just kind of have to, if you need them, play them and see if one falls in the end zone.
Yeah, with all our bye weeks coming up at this point, you're probably going to play them in those scenarios, but So they'll probably be starting for you for the next 3 or 4 weeks while we go through all the bye weeks, but I don't think I'm playing them with confidence. I like Bucky Irving a little bit more. He does look a little bit better, and the coaching staff did trust him. He fumbled in the fourth quarter, and they gave him another handoff right after that. So that is always a sign for me, right? The Chiefs, when Carson Steele fumbled, didn't play the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And for them,
I want to go back on that because I think White got a little dinged up.
that could be 100%. You're right. I did see him kind of hobble off. So,
but they know like he's still locked in like right behind White in that game. So both are guys you absolutely keep in your roster, and you're right. The bye weeks are hitting now, and with bye weeks and other running back injuries, they're two dudes that you can play with a hope of some upside there. I do want to get your thoughts on Baker Mayfield, who is balling, but he's so touchdown dependent right now. Like Baker Mayfield, 18 points in all but one game, and it was just that wild game where Denver goes in there and shocks the Buccaneers. But we're seeing 11 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, great ratio there, but only 180 yards passing last night for Baker Mayfield. And that's kind of the thing is he's so touchdown dependent. But when you look at, again, like you said, this spike weeks, and I'm talking already 3 games with 18 plus points, like Baker, the touchdown maker, man, he's moving up to a dude you have to start every week.
Look at his receivers. He's got Mike Evans, who is like he scored his 100th touchdown in Thursday night's game of his career. And then you have Chris Godwin, who is also pretty amazing. So you got those guys. Yeah, he's not going to get a ton of yards, but if we're being 100% honest, yards, unless you're throwing for 400, 500, don't usually amount that much for quarterbacks, right? Because if a quarterback gets 1 point for every 25 yards, which is the norm on Yahoo, that's 4 points for 100 yards. That's 12 points if you throw 300 yards. Touchdowns do matter, and he's doing it. And he runs a little bit, and those yards count too. He doesn't run a lot, but he might get you 20. That's 2 points. Like, we'll take that all day. So and Baker Mayfield does spike, like you said.
Man, so at New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta at home, and then at Kansas City. So challenging schedule coming up, but he said he has the receivers, he's throwing touchdowns, and that keeps Baker Mayfield on the quarterback radar. So TNF takes immediate takeaways from a wild game, 36-30 overtime win for the Falcons. So that's back-to-back division wins for the Falcons, who are 3-2. Buccaneers go to 3-2. So Kirk Cousins and the Falcons take a big jump in the NFC South. Bye weeks and injuries, and that brings us to fill-in running backs. And I really wanted to talk about some running back depth going into this weekend because of the bye weeks that you mentioned that are coming, the injuries that were popping up to starting running backs in the NFL, and then also moving forward, how to deal with handcuffs and maybe when to put some of these guys in the lineup. And sometimes you're just going to have to take chances. But the big news is Jonathan Taylor, Colts running back, is out. Joe Mixon remains out for the Houston Texans. Brian Robinson Jr., they're saying he's a game-time decision, but I am not expecting Brian Robinson to play after missing 2 practices with a knee injury, getting in limited work on Friday. And I don't like that matchup either against Cleveland, even with how hot the Commanders are running. And then, Devin Singletary, he's been that RB2 flex guy because of the touches. He has a groin injury. It's going to be rookie Tyrone Tracy stepping up most likely there. So let's talk about the fill-ins and the potential direct replacements. And we'll start with the Colts, who it's not just Jonathan Taylor, but you have Anthony Richardson. That's questionable. And the whole Colts offense right now, well, you feel better with Joe Flacco starting than Anthony Richardson. But either way, Trey Sermon is going to step in. Shane Steichen said today that it's going to be a committee approach. But when you look at Goodson, he has 1 touch on the season. So I do think it's going to be early and often for Trey Sermon. When you're looking at these guys, and I'm going to give you some names. So you got Trey Sermon. I'm going to talk about Jeremy McNichols, who had 2 touchdowns last week for the Commanders in their blowout over the Cardinals when Austin Eckler was out. So you got Austin Eckler coming back in. He's full go. Jeremy McNichols, the Commanders running backs. Then we have Tyrone Tracy, who's been the number 2 back for the Giants. And then, potentially looking at Cam Akers and Dare Goombawali again. How you feeling? Let's start with maybe ranking those guys of who you're plugging and playing this week.
I don't love any of them. But if I'm having to, it depends.
Let's preface this real quick too. So we're talking Saquon Barkley, the Lions running backs, Montgomery Gibbs, J.K. Dobbins, and Tony Pollard are all on bye. So that kind of opens that door again for weekly starters that are not playing this week.
Exactly. So, obviously, if we're ranking them, I'm going to take Austin Eckler first. Obviously, he wasn't 100% mentioned, but if you have him on your team, he should be starting because he looked good 2 weeks ago. He's coming back. And then for me, it's probably going to be Jeremy McNichols. Just I would rather have a good offense, a team with a good offense than anything. The Texans have been primarily throwing the ball more without Joe Mixon. But Cam Akers is definitely getting the looks. I think he had 14 carries last week. They didn't amount to much. I think he ended up with 52 yards total and no targets. But you can kind of hope he falls into the end zone. So I guess if I had to re-rank it, it would be Austin Eckler, then it's probably Cam Akers, and then Jeremy McNichols. That would be how I would rank it. And then what was it? Who's the other name you mentioned?
So Trey Sermon.
Yeah, I don't know if I 100% want to touch the Colts offensive running backs. I'm more interested in the receivers. I think Joe Flacco makes the receivers look a lot better. Josh Downs, I think, gets a bump with him back there. And Michael Pittman looked amazing. I think you can start Michael Pittman with some confidence this week if Joe Flacco goes.
Oh, yeah.
But
Joe Flacco's going, I'm all on the Colts receivers. Anthony Richards is playing. I'm not in.
I'm probably out on the backfield either way. But yeah, if Anthony Richards is playing, I don't want to start. I'm going to avoid the Colts more. Unless I have, even with Anthony Richardson, he hasn't looked fantastic. He looks like the guy we kind of expected. He's not very accurate. He hits those big plays down the field.
So here's the thing with Jacksonville. Let's talk about that defense real quick, because if removing Austin Eckler out of the equation, because I think Austin Eckler is a start this week. I would have Trey Sermon right there. Not just because I might have to start him this week, but we look at Jacksonville is 25th.
Yep.
Against running backs.
It's a division thing for me though. I've always had trouble with division games where I'm like, you're 100% right though. Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon could go off.
And so that's why I'm looking at that one. I think it could be a tight game, but I don't see them necessarily going in there and messing with both running backs too much. I really am interested in Tyrone Tracy, but I don't know yet if Seattle's going to have as many injuries as they did. They had 6 players in their front 7 that did not play in that Monday Night Football game. Because that would open it back up for me, because David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are premier backs in this league. But when we have that many people missing in your front 7 defensively, even with the rookie running back in the Giants, I'd be interested in him, because as we've seen, it's Tyrone Tracy was running as a clear-cut number 2 in that offense without Devin Singletary. If he does not play, I think you're looking at 12 to 16 probably guaranteed touches. So I do like that number there. McNichols, I'm really interested in, just as you mentioned, it's how hot the Commanders' offense is running. But I really think that this is going to be a tough game, just defensively for the Commanders. Because you look at one thing Cleveland has done is they have the 6th best numbers against running backs in PPR.
I guess the thing that would be important is with Tyrone Tracy, I do like Brian Daboll a lot. He does seem to, and another fact to think about is Malik Neighbors was announced he's out. So there could be a lot of checkdowns. You're not wrong in that thought process. So he might be a player that would move up my board a little bit higher, just because you could see that, maybe he gets 5 catches, 20 yards, and then 10 carries for maybe 50. Hey, that's a good 12-point game from a replacement running back. I'd be happy with that. So
I actually like Sermon. So mine this week going to be Trey Sermon, Tracy, and like you said, I could be talked into Tracy over Sermon at this point in time, depending on the final injury report for the Seahawks. If they're that banged up in the front again, that could allow some nice opportunities there. McNichols, I'm a little cooler on, but he's going to have a role because we saw it last week. They still play two punt running backs. Even with Brian Robinson Jr. getting the bulk of the carries, they still working two backs in that offense. And Robinson is game time decision, as we mentioned. I don't expect he's going to play. And then you mentioned Cam Akers is in there, and I think we don't really need to talk about Cam Akers because you're starting him anyway if you have him. But I think Dare Ogunbowale could be an interesting one. He scored a touchdown last week receiving wise, 4 for 47. It's something to watch out to if Akers really isn't moving and they have to throw the football more in this matchup because Buffalo, they've been pretty good against running backs. So if they take away running backs, maybe get more in that PPR game, that's where he could come in. And
a dart throw that I think we should kind of throw out there, and he might not be available in a lot of leagues, but I'm checking right now to see his roster percentage, is Ty Chandler. He's only owned in 28% of leagues. Wow. Minnesota, he's getting his looks. I don't know if he's 100% the player I want to play because they are playing the Jets. But if you're needing a dart throw and there's nobody out there, he might be a player you can think about picking up. I would take Tracy first. I would take Cam Akers. I would all those other players. But if you're sitting there and you're in a pinch and all those guys we just talked about aren't available, I could see I would dart throw at Ty Chandler.
I don't know if I could do that with the way that they're playing Aaron Jones and the Jets, or right now the second best overall defense.
I get where you're coming from. I do.
Then you combined, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, fantasy points. I would actually look to, in this case, Antonio Gibson. Because Ramondre Stevenson has fumbled on 4 games. Gerard Mayo, the Patriots head coach, brought it up this week that he's putting pressure on Ramondre Stevenson. You stop fumbling or Gibson's going to get more work. So Antonio Gibson potentially could be one of those guys in a PPR pinch this week and in the pillow fight that will be the Patriots Dolphins game.
Yeah, both teams, the 2 lowest scoring teams in the league. The reason I brought it up is excluding the Green Bay game, which I felt like they were trying to make sure Aaron Jones kind of got his comeback game in there. Ty Chandler has had no less than 7 rush attempts and at least 1 target in every game. So, it's not a lot, but if he's getting 1 target, 2 targets, and 7 runs, you're
looking for opportunity.
Yep. And so that was the only reason I said, hey, a dart throw might be a Ty Chandler play if you're hurting. If you missed out on Kareem Hunt on the waiver wire, or you missed out on somebody else in your league, especially our deeper leagues, those guys might not be available. Ty Chandler might be the guy to just kind of take a dart throw at.
Yeah. So guys that we like this week, I'm going with Trey Sermon. Tracy might actually end up being number 1 for there, but Trey Sermon in the Colts matchup. You're right. It's a tough division game against the Jaguars, but they have struggled. They are actually the worst overall in terms of fantasy points given up combined offensively, 25th against running backs. I'll keep your fingers crossed, chasing maybe a touchdown with Trey Sermon there. Tyrone Tracy and Giants game, like they're starving for offense. And you brought up that maybe there's some more targets there with Malik Neighbors out of the lineup. I'll go with McNichols because you need to trust Commanders' offense and the fact that they use 2 backs. Austin Eckler is starting, but I think McNichols could be valuable. Dude scored 2 touchdowns. I get they blew out Arizona, but they gave him carries. They gave him looks in that game. And then, potentially keep an eye on Antonio Gibson, Chandler, guys that you're going to probably be looking for running back because of the injuries that popped up this week and the amount of guys that are on bye week. But I want to then ask you about players that are on rosters, especially when you're looking at Breon Allen with coming off the Denver game. Breece Hall gets stuffed at the goal line a couple of times. Robert Saleh gets a little frustrated. Maybe he says he's going to work in Allen a little more. Someone like Justice Hill, who had a really big game receiving wise, but he's another player that's kind of getting constant looks in that offense, over 40% snap share, even with Derrick Henry doing crazy things, over 30 points the last 2 weeks, or even to Tank Bigsby, who's popping some better efficiency numbers with Travis Etienne struggling. The guys that you want on your roster because you know that, hey, they can slide into a potential number one role. But how do you feel about playing those guys in a weekend like this?
You actually mentioned Tank Bigsby, and I was looking at it, and he's only 21% rostered. So that's another good pickup. But well, and Travis Etienne, just to kind of double down on this, he's dealing with a little bit of an injury, so we could see a Tank Bigsby increase. Braylon Allen has outperformed Breece Hall the last 2 weeks in efficiency. So that's a player I don't mind starting. Like I actually would feel more comfortable starting those two over a lot of the names we mentioned if they're out there, just because I do think Tank Bigsby could have a big week just because Travis Etienne hasn't been running well and he's dealing with an injury. Braylon Allen, again, he's been really good. He's looked good. So I think in a lot of those cases, you're talking about teams that do enjoy running the ball, right? The Jets have been almost run first lately. And Trevor Lawrence hasn't looked great, so they've been running a lot more than until they get into negative game scripts. So, it might not be great, but you have a chance. I think Tank Bigsby last week had 90 rushing yards off of like 8 carries or 6 carries. It was fantastic. Braylon Allen is doing some special stuff over there too. So I love those two. I would actually feel a lot more comfortable starting them. And if I'm the Breece Hall owner, I would actually, and I have Braylon Allen and I'm hurting. Maybe my other running back is, Saquon, or well, it's probably not Saquon, but one of the Lions or somebody like that. I have no problem starting both of them and hoping one of them goes off.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting week too, where you start having these guys that are getting some work. You want them on your roster, but it's like kind of when do you pull the trigger? And now you're gonna have to start pulling the trigger on these guys in your lineup. And I like what you said about those guys. I will add, Bigsby and Etienne both off the injury report. I'm going into the weekend.
Good to know. Yeah.
So both are playing. Yeah, when you look at Indianapolis, we were talking about Jacksonville. So Indianapolis has been 16th against fantasy running backs, so middle of the road. So it could be opportunity for both players, especially with Jacksonville needing to find something, with the pressure that Doug Peterson's under, 0-4, and looking for playmakers on an offense, and Bigsby could fill that hole. So running backs to think about this weekend with a lot of injuries and waivers are in, but maybe check again, because I think the Singletary stuff and Robinson stuff came up a little bit later in the week. So I think there's probably still an opportunity to grab some of these guys if they're out there heading into week 5. Quarterbacks. I was really fascinated this week looking at some of the consensus quarterback rankings of what we're looking at. And guys that are in the top 10, potentially top 6 quarterbacks this weekend, I don't feel good about. But do we need to trust them if you're chasing quarterbacks? So the 2 guys that I've seen within the top 6, Brock Purdy against Arizona, and Justin Fields against the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, Fields, you're chasing the rushing production. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, so that's 3 rushing touchdowns over his last 2 outings, but that's hard to rely on at the quarterback position. And then someone like Brock Purdy, they're 7.5-point favorites, but you wonder, hey, is this a game where they get in control and then it's their Jordan Mason show and Brock Purdy doesn't have to do too much? And then you're looking at guys like Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, outside the top 10. When you look at the quarterback position this week, are you buying big weeks from some of these guys that are ranked inside the top 10 across the industry?
I don't buy Justin Fields. Last week, 31 points, but the 3 weeks leading up to that, I think he'd scored like 11, and 18 or 16. So, a 30-point game doesn't make me go, oh, I'm all over this. And Dallas, I don't think is a terrible defense, and they're not great, but I don't think they're terrible. Brock Purdy, I do think could have a good week. I do agree Jordan Mason will probably be the main focus, but that doesn't mean he won't throw a few touchdowns to Kittle in the end zone. So, I agree with a lot of the consensus. The Fields thing is just I'm out on Fields. I think we're chasing production that isn't necessarily going to be reproduced.
Yeah, so Justin Fields, by the way, to add this in there, Justin Fields averaging 2.25 designed carries per game. So they haven't been utilizing that way, and they were in catch-up mode against the Colts, getting off to a slow start. And so I think that contributed to him opening up more, using his legs, chasing that game, where people are actually, you look at this contest, it's Cowboys coming in. They've been struggling defensively. Are they going to be playing catch-up mode? Are they going to be asking Justin Fields to do that much in Sunday Night Football?
I mean, at this point, I to kind of segue a little bit, I'd actually feel more confident starting like Andy Dalton over Justin Fields, just because he's been playing so well. And I think they're playing Chicago this week. So Chicago's been, or is it Chicago?
Yes.
Yeah. So Chicago's been relatively good against the pass and quarterbacks, but Andy Dalton has looked good his last 2 weeks. He's put up decent numbers. I think it's like 15 and 32. So he's literally, or 15 and, I have it right here, 15 and 24 and 4-point passing touchdowns. Yeah, it's not great numbers, but it's probably a better floor than I have with Fields. It is a better floor than I have with Fields. So I'm hoping you don't have to start any of those guys. Like, I'm hoping you have I'm hoping you have a better option. You have?
Like, there's the lock.
I'm hoping you started Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. Half people didn't. He was on your roster in the leagues. But we're talking about Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Jordan Love, the locks this week.
Yep.
In lineups. I think Joe Burrow, to me, he's a lock candidate.
Joe Burrow's
every single week. And then outside of that, we've had the discussions, the ups and downs with Patrick
Daniels is probably a lock.
Yeah, so Jackson, Allen, Daniels.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you say.
That's right. Burrow. And then you have Stroud. Right?
Yeah.
I think those are guys you're starting. But then, Patrick Mahomes is an up and down. Do you like Sam, even though Sam Darnold's throwing touchdown passes like crazy? He's got a tough matchup against the New York Jets in London. So Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins are already off the board. Either played him or he didn't. And guys, so I would over Brock Purdy and Justin Fields, like, give me Geno Smith.
Yes,
like they have
I would take Geno.
They have the best neutral pass rate right now in the NFL. They throw the football. Kenneth Walker scored 3 touchdowns in a game. Geno Smith still was really productive. Now it's the Giants, right? And so that's kind of what you're worried about is game script. Do they get up early? Do they throw the football enough? But I think part of how they're going to get up early is moving the football through the air.
Yeah.
And so, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. So I think Geno Smith will kind of get his points before it just becomes the Kenneth Walker takeover show. And when you're looking down, Joe Flacco interests me, man. Like, I think they're going to throw the football in that matchup if he's playing. Now, Anthony Richardson is questionable.
Yeah.
So you have to wait and see. But if Flacco is playing, they don't have Jonathan Taylor. He has Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. Like, I'd like Joe Flacco this weekend too. Like, over even a Justin Fields. Because I don't – the thing about Justin Fields is you get Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels. You get the rushing total, but you're getting passing production.
Correct.
I don't have that same guarantee out of Justin Fields.
Well, they've done a really good job in Pittsburgh of not making him win games. It's kind of like, hey, just don't lose us this game. So take your checkdowns, and if nothing else, throw the ball away and let the defense go get better field position, and we'll try again, or we'll kick a field goal. The games they've won haven't been high-scoring games, so they haven't needed to. I agree with you. I think I'd rather start Joe Flacco this week if he plays over Justin Fields. I'm out on Justin Fields, though. I just don't want it.
And around the industry, he's a top 10 guy this week. You look at a lot of the rankings; he was within the top 10. But I just don't like banking on the rushing protection when you're not eating a lot in the pass game. And I think Cowboys aren't a great rush defense, but that hasn't been the game plan. Like, Steelers aren't just letting Justin Fields run around like crazy. They were chasing last week, and that allowed Justin Fields to do more on the ground game against the Colts. So it's one where you have those guys locked in, and then think about the week ahead. And you said it last week, Steve. If you're playing the streaming quarterback game, try to get a week ahead of it.
Yep, especially because next week the teams on bye are the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Rams, and the Vikings, right? So if you're starting Sam Darnold this week, you need to be prepared for next week. If you're starting Patrick Mahomes, which we're talking like, hey, maybe think about picking up Kirk Cousins, get ahead of these guys. Start looking at the next week. Because you don't want to be the one sitting there going, oh, I wish I would have picked Kirk Cousins, or I wish I would have had Baker Mayfield. Like, be aware. Hey, if you're starting quarterbacks on bye week next week, who's your fill-in?
And speaking of being aware, let's talk some waivers and FAB, free agent acquisition budget. And the big ones this week were Latavian Wicks and Kareem Hunt. Those were the hot commodities off of said waiver wire. Those are the two guys I put in for. Those are the two guys I was outbid by Steven. But you brought up a really interesting point. We haven't had that week where there was a must-have guy.
Yep.
And this was the first one where there was like people who were hot on Wicks.
Yes.
Coming off the weekend. And then, of course, Kareem Hunt, he's a name and he plays for the Chiefs. So a lot of people just associate that with fantasy points.
Yep.
So that was the two that people were going after this week. But you made sure you got them. And you spent your FAB budget. And one thing you said is, that's what you have it for, right? You don't want to just be sitting on it and have it at the end of the season and not take chances and not try to get guys that, by the way, you got them both and they're in your lineup this weekend.
Yeah, well, so for me, it's a twofold thing. Last season, I had a terrible season and I kept sitting on my FAB waiting for that guy, but I kept missing out on, the Puka Nakuas and the Kyron Williams and player X, Y, and Z, especially at the beginning of the season. I was like, well, somebody else is going to come. And then I just keep missing. But the second part is, this season I wanted to make sure, like, if there was a player I was really interested in, I wanted to be the highest bidder because I wanted to walk away with them. The second part for me is I'm dealing with Puka being out and CMC on injury, and Jalen Waddle's not performing because Tua's out. Like, the Dolphins' offense looks anemic. So I said, okay, well, I only have this week Darnell Mooney and the rest of my players are on bye, right? Because I don't have Jameson Williams and all those other guys. So I swung big and just said, if I have no FAB the rest of the season, I will just have to be the guy who picks up waiver players off of waivers after waivers run. And in a 10-team league, you can do that. But I always feel like if there's a player that you believe in, don't get caught up in what all of the fantasy experts are saying, including us, because I saw it everywhere. You should bid 25% of your FAB for Dontavian Wicks, and you should bid 15% for Kareem Hunt. And I said, I have $70. I'm bidding 35 on both of them.
Yeah.
I want to walk away with both of them. I don't want to be sitting on this money hoping I get one of them. I'm just going to make sure I get both of them.
And it works. And they're guys that we saw Kareem Hunt, what he did last week, stepping up into the offense, feeling comfortable. They trust him. And with Rashee Rice being out, I think we're going to see still that kind of insulated game plan, lean on Kareem Hunt. Travis Kelce took a step forward, and then it's going to be by committee. And maybe I think Xavier Worthy is still just going to be that hit or miss guy with the routes that he's running. So I think buying into that offense, Kareem Hunt was the right choice. And then we know the Packers are explosive with Jordan Love. And Wicks has, 2 30-point games with Jordan Love in the lineup this year?
I don't think they're that big, but yes.
It's 20-plus points for sure.
Yeah, I will look right now because I have it up. But let's see. He only has his 24-point game from last week. And then that first week was the Philadelphia game. He only had 1 or 3 targets in that game. So, but he does have an 11-point game without Jordan Love.
Okay, so yeah, so with Jordan Love, yeah, excuse me. So he went off, but yeah, I said it's opportunity. It's an offense that you trust, and I'm with you in going after who you want, and especially when you're bidding on it, and you have the ability to do that with that. It changes the game when it comes to waivers because you can get one of these guys, and I placed bids on both those guys. I didn't go that far, and now I kind of wish I went a little bit harder on Kareem Hunt.
Yeah,
but
and that was kind of my point. Is last season I was the one who kept missing out. I got outbid by you on Puka by $2. I got outbid on Kyron by $5, and then I'm sitting at the end of the season in almost last place, and I have $50 in my fab. What does that $50 do? Like, by the time we get to week 8 or 9, you're using that money to pick up a player off of waivers because somebody else got hurt. There's no guarantee they're going to be good. Dontavian Wicks, with Christian Watson out now and Romeo Doubs looking like he might not play because he was a late addition to the injury report, he should have a big week. Kareem Hunt, we know Isaiah Pacheco's on IR, so he's out at least 4 weeks. We're expecting at least 8 to 12. He came off the couch and ended up with 14 touches. It can't get worse. So at least I don't expect it. So those were the players. I was like, hey, we finally have the players we have to add. And there's going to be another player that comes up. Don't get caught like holding on to your money. Winning a fantasy championship is an all season thing. I'd rather have too many good players on my bench than not enough.
By the way, so I was thinking Jaden Reed. So
yeah, I figured
33 and 27 point
yes.
fantasy games in PPR with Jordan Love, but still Wicks, I think he slides in. He's going to be the number 2. Watson's out. Doubs isn't playing either this week. That's big time. Wicks is going to pay off. If you invested in him, you're going to get immediate payout from him this week.
And that's all a lot of the times you're just trying to win a week at a time. And sometimes we think too long season, right? Like I'm 2-2 right now. If I'm 3-2, hey, I look great. And if I'm 2-3, I feel a little bit worse. You just have to keep kind of chipping away and hope by the
That's
time
right.
you get
win the week.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. That's what you're just trying to do is win the week in the moment and then figure it out from there. So speaking of winning the week, it's time for plant your flag. Who is going to go off this weekend? Someone that should be in your lineup, or if you're putting a daily fantasy lineup together, guys that we like that can help you maybe cash in something this week. Let's go back to last week, week 4 recap. You should have been in on Mooney. I got 8.6 points, which is solid. But if you listen to Steven last week and you put Mooney in your lineup or you picked him up and you played him, you're going to win this weekend. You already have 31 points on the board. Like you're winning.
And you killed it with Evans. Not only were you right, but you were right again because he killed it in the Thursday night game. So
well, Evans it was more about the daily fantasy piece for me because my last 2 were Amari Cooper and Mike Evans. I'm not breaking any news, but they both. If you look at Mike Evans coming into that game last week, the 2 weeks prior, he had 7 points and 4 points. So if Mike Evans was a guy that you were still starting, but if you put him in your daily fantasy lineup or you're playing underdog fantasy or something along those lines and went the higher, that was my thought process of these are the established guys that were going off. I just happened to hit the last 2 weeks Amari Cooper, Mike Evans. But changing things up a little bit this week.
Yeah, so I'm actually going with the established veteran. So this week, my plant the flag is going to be Najee Harris. Jalen Warren's already been announced out. Dallas has a weak run D. I think they're going to have to run the ball. It's just going to be what it is. I think Najee, who has had, I think, a 10 and 11 point game his last 2 weeks, this is the week that I think if you play him, you are going to be getting 15 to 16 points, maybe more depending on touchdowns. Dallas is the 3rd worst team against running backs, and he's going to be the only one getting the ball. So I could see a potential where Najee Harris falls into the end zone twice. We already talked about Justin Fields doesn't really throw the ball down the field that much. And if the game script's right, Najee Harris will have a big week. And I love him for daily, especially because he's not that expensive right now.
I do like that a lot, especially Cordell Patterson being out, and Najee Harris is going to get the focal point, and I think he finds the end zone this week. And that's also one of those things we're just having a discussion about Justin Fields and relying on him, and you really need him to get that rushing touchdown, but I think it's going to go to Najee Harris this week. My plant the flag this weekend, I'm going rookie. I'm going young. I'm going Rome Odunze. So switching it up. I'm expecting a big game from Rome Odunze. It's been quiet the last few weeks. Caleb Williams, I think it's time for him to hit some big plays down the field. They got the dub over the Rams, but Rome Odunze was quiet. Just 3 targets, 1 catch, 10 yards. I'm feeling this game is going to be like 3 for 70 and a touchdown. They're going to hit a big play down the field with Rome Odunze, open it up over the top. And a lot of people are looking at DJ Moore, the revenge game. He's playing the Carolina Panthers. I'm going Rome Odunze. I think it's rookie to rookie, going to take their shots. And again, he's on your bench. He's flex-worthy to me this week if you're looking for that big play potential and looking for a cheap filler to build your daily fantasy lineup. Rome Odunze is going off this weekend.
Well, that's funny because we actually, before we started the show, that was mine too. So I had to change mine up. But my premise behind it is Rome Odunze, and Carolina is not very good at that back shoulder fade ball. And that's what Caleb Williams and him have been working on. And it seems like that's their connection. I could see Rome Odunze not only having 3 for 70 and a touchdown, I could actually see him going over 100 yards this week. So I 100% agree with you. I think that's a great play. And I love the call. It's a great call. So I agreed with you because I had the same player.
That's funny. We did have it at that point in time. So there's plant your flag guys that we like and get them in your fantasy football lineups or your daily fantasy lineups going into this week. And it's going to be a really interesting one because you're either flying high or you're chasing. And so we have that right now. You're flying high with Mooney coming off Thursday Night Football, and I'm stuck chasing. And I got some injuries, man. I'm one of those dudes that Brian Robinson is hurt. So I'm trying to figure out those holes. And then this is what we talk about is, coming off Thursday Night Football, depending on what happens, you have to make those decisions. Like, I'm going to have to swing for the fences this week. And I'm going to be the guy that's not looking for maybe that floor play. I'm going to have to take a couple chances of, all right, is Xavier Worthy going to pop off? Do I think like they're actually going to use, Justice Hill in the passing game again this week? Like it's swinging for the fences coming off Thursday Night Football for me.
Yeah, I mean, we've been there before, and sometimes you want to take that big flyer. I always think there's nothing wrong with it, especially if you did play against the person who had Mike Evans or Drake London or in your case Darnell Mooney. I get where you're coming from, and taking a shot at Xavier Worthy to say, hey, maybe he gets another 60-yard touchdown. Just, never feel bad if you lose because you took a swing and it didn't work. So that's what I always try to keep myself and remind myself, hey, you took a swing for this reason. Because I did it last week and I lost. My guys did not hit. But that, I don't hate that I tried, because I came off that Thursday night game way behind. Didn't hit it. It happens.
But just be ready for whatever you need to do on Sunday morning. It's going to be an interesting week with the running back. So hopefully, you can make that right choice. We gave you some names to look out for, some one-for-one replacements, some game scripts, some things to keep in mind when it comes to the running back position. Quarterbacks, I think there's some decent plays out there outside the top 10. If you're looking at rankings, you don't feel good. Well, I think there's opportunities to chase good production at the quarterback position this week, and then we'll see. We planted our flags, and are they going to get it done? We'll find out. We'll be back with you next Friday to discuss it once again. But let's go. It's already week 5 of the NFL season. Can you believe it?
No, it takes forever to get here, and then it flies by.
Flying by. It's flying by. So you can check us out all over the place, of course, on the Instagram, 3 Dudes Fantasy Football. You can follow us on the X at 3 Dudes FFS. Have some fun. Go back and forth. Questions, comments, you name it, right there. And, of course, weekly for you right here on YouTube. Hopefully, Aaron enjoying it. He has a life. Can you believe that?
Nah, I don't know. It's because we have kids and he
going
doesn't.
to concerts, having fun, going out on a Friday night. Well, we're here for you on the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show, and our trusty third amigo Aaron Hernandez will be back soon enough. But for Steven Masterson, this way, I'm JJ Buck. Thank you for joining us here on the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show, and may the fantasy odds be in your favor this weekend.
Peace, y'all.